Karen's face flushed with rage as she stomped towards the blind man and his guide dog. The nerve of him, pretending not to hear her call. She had been waiting in line at the bank for over 20 minutes, and this inconsiderate man was holding up the queue with his slow, meandering pace. "Excuse me," she bellowed, her shrill voice cutting through the hushed chatter. "Your dog is blocking the line. Can't you control it?" The blind man turned towards the sound of her voice, his milky eyes betraying no emotion. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize I was in your way." He gently tugged on the harness, guiding his Labrador retriever to the side. But Karen was having none of it. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" she accused, her fingers curling into tight fists. "Trying to make everyone wait while you waddle around at your own pace. Well, I've got places to be, mister, and I don't have time for your little power trip." A hush fell over the bank as other customers turned to watch the spectacle unfold. The blind man's brow furrowed in confusion, his hand reaching out to calm his dog, who had begun to whine anxiously. "I'd assure you, I'm not trying to inconvenience anyone," he said, his voice low and even. "I'm just trying to get my business done, same as you." Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowing in contempt. "Well, you're failing miserably. Move your mutt out of the way, or I'll make you regret it." The blind man hesitated, his grip tightening on the harness. "I'm not going to move him. That's my guide dog, and he's here to help me navigate. I won't put him in harm's way because you're in a hurry." For a moment, Karen was stunned into silence. How dared this man defy her? Didn't he know who she was? She was Karen, a successful businesswoman who was used to getting her way. No one, especially not some helpless blind man, was going to stand in her path. "That's it," she hissed, her eyes narrowing to slits. "You asked for this." Rearing back, she took a step forward and brought her foot down hard on the guide dog's paw. The animal let out a yelp of pain, cowering away from the attack. The blind man gasped, his face a mask of horror as he reached down to comfort his companion. "What is wrong with you?" he cried, his voice trembling with shock and anger. "How could you do that to a harmless animal?" Karen just sneered, unfazed by the man's distress. "He's ignoring me on purpose. I had to get his attention somehow." Turning on her heel, she stormed off, leaving the blind man and the whimpering dog in her wake. As she exited the bank, Karen felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She had shown that blind fool who was boss. No one crossed Karen and got away with it. Little did she know, her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would forever change her life. As Karen stormed out of the bank, her heart was still pounding with adrenaline. She couldn't believe the nerve of that blind man, refusing to move his stupid dog out of her way. Didn't he realize she was an important person with places to be? Fuming, Karen stalked to her car, slamming the door behind her. She sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. How dare he make her wait like that? She should have reported him to the manager for creating a disturbance. Just then, a tap on the window made her jump. She turned to see a security guard standing there, his face stern. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," he said, his voice brooking no argument. Karen's eyes widened in alarm. "What? Why?" she demanded, already racking her brain for any wrongdoing she might have committed. "There's been a complaint about an incident involving you and a blind man's guide dog," the guard explained. "The manager would like to speak with you." Karen's stomach churned with dread. Of course the blind fool had tattled on her. Didn't he realize who he was dealing with? She was Karen, a respected businesswoman with connections. This little stunt was not going to end well for him. Reluctantly, she followed the security guard back into the bank, her head held high. As she approached the manager's office, she could feel the curious stares of the other customers burning into her back. Let them stare, she thought, chin raised defiantly. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The manager, A middle-aged woman with a stern expression gestured for Karen to take a seat. "Mrs. Walters, I've been informed that you assaulted a blind man's guide dog. Is this true?" Karen scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Assault? Please. I merely tapped the mutt to get its attention. That man was deliberately blocking the line, and I had places to be." The manager's frown deepened. "That mutt, as you call it, is a highly trained service animal. Harming it is a serious offense. I'm afraid I have no choice but to ban you from this bank." Karen's jaw dropped, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Ban me? You can't be serious. Do you have any idea who I am?" She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a dangerous growl. "I'm one of your biggest clients. You can't do this to me." The manager remained unfazed. "I'm afraid I can. Mrs. Walters, my decision is final. Now, I must ask you to leave the premises immediately." Seething with rage, Karen rose from her chair, her hands shaking. "This isn't over," she spat, storming out of the office. As she marched past the other customers, she could feel their judging eyes on her back. This was humiliating, and she wasn't going to stand for it. Karen had never been so furious in her life. No one, not even a pathetic blind man and his stupid dog, was going to ruin her day. She was going to make sure that this incident didn't go unpunished. One way or another, she was going to get her revenge. As Karen stormed out of the bank, her mind was racing with fury and indignation. How dare they ban her, one of the bank's biggest clients, all because of some measly blind man and his mutt? This was an outrage, and she was determined to make them pay. Hopping into her luxury SUV, Karen peeled out of the parking lot, her tires screeching. She needed to get away and think, to come up with a plan that would teach that blind fool and the bank a lesson they'd never forget. As she drove, her mind whirred with ideas. Should she file a complaint with the bank's corporate office? Or maybe she could sue them for discrimination. But no, that would take too long, and Karen wanted her revenge now. Then it hit her. A wicked grin spread across her face as the perfect plan unfolded in her mind. She knew exactly how to get back at that blind man and the bank that had dared to defy her. Pulling into the driveway of her lavish estate, Karen rushed inside, her designer heels clacking against the marble floors. She strode straight to her home office, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began to research. It wasn't long before she had everything she needed: the name and address of the blind man, as well as the location of his guide dog's training facility. With a triumphant cackle, she set her plan into motion. First, she placed an anonymous call to the training facility, claiming to be a concerned citizen who had witnessed the blind man's dog attacking a child. She demanded that the facility take immediate action, warning them that if they didn't, she would go to the media with her story. The frantic staff at the facility fell for her ruse hook, line, and sinker. Within hours, they had tracked down the blind man and confiscated his beloved guide dog, claiming it was a danger to the public. The blind man, devastated and confused, tried in vain to reason with the facility staff, but they refused to listen. Karen watched the whole scene unfold from the safety of her car, a twisted smile playing on her lips. "They'll teach you to mess with me," she murmured, her eyes glinting with triumph. She knew that without his guide dog, the blind man would be utterly helpless, forced to rely on the kindness of strangers or expensive mobility aids. As she drove away, Karen felt a sense of satisfaction unlike any she had ever known. She had won, and that was all that mattered. The blind man had learned a valuable lesson. Never cross Karen Walters and expect to get away with it. Little did she know, her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would soon come back to haunt her in the most unexpected and devastating way. As the days passed, Karen felt a sense of triumph and satisfaction over her success in getting the blind man's guide dog taken away. She had shown that pathetic fool who was in charge, and she relished the thought of him struggling to get around without his precious companion. But Karen's gloating was short-lived. One morning, as she was sipping her coffee and perusing the news on her tablet, a headline caught her eye and made her blood run cold. Blind man struck kek and killed by car after GYD confiscated. Karen's hands trembled as she read the article, her heart pounding in her chest. According to the report, the blind man had become disoriented and wandered into the street, unable to navigate without his guide dog. He had been hit by a passing vehicle and killed instantly. Bile rose in Karen's throat as she realized the devastating consequences of her actions. She had never intended for the blind man to be harmed. She had just wanted to teach him a lesson, to show him that he couldn't defy her with impunity. But now, her petty vengeance had cost an innocent man his life. Overcome with guilt and horror, Karen sank back into her chair, her coffee forgotten. She tried to rationalize her actions, to convince herself that it wasn't her fault, but the haunting image of the blind man's lifeless body on the asphalt wouldn't leave her mind. Suddenly, Karen felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She scrambled to the bathroom, heaving into the toilet as the full weight of her guilt crashed down upon her. She had taken a life that she had no right to take, all because of her own selfish and entitled behavior. As she sat on the cold tile floor, tears streaming down her face, Karen realized that her life would never be the same. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The blood of an innocent man was on her hands, and she would have to live with that for the rest of her days. Slowly, Karen pulled herself to her feet, her legs trembling. She had to make this right, somehow. But how could she ever atone for what she had done? The guilt and shame threatened to consume her, and she knew that she would never be able to truly forgive herself. With a heavy heart, Karen made her way to the police station, determined to turn herself in and face the consequences of her actions. She knew that it wouldn't undo the harm she had caused, but perhaps it would be a step towards redemption, if such a thing was even possible for someone like her. As she walked through the station's doors, Karen's world crumbled around her. The price of her entitled behavior had been far higher than she ever could have imagined. As Karen sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room of the police station, her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and resignation. She had come here to confess her role in the tragic death of the blind man, but that didn't make it any easier. The detective who entered the room eyed her warily, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Walters, I understand you have information about the incident involving the blind man and his guide dog." Karen swallowed hard, her palms sweating. "Yes, detective. I'm the one responsible for what happened." The detective's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he remained silent, gesturing for her to continue. Taking a deep breath, Karen laid out the entire sordid tale. Her confrontation with the blind man at the bank, her callous disregard for his disability, and her vindictive plan to have his guide dog taken away. By the time she finished, her voice was trembling, and tears were streaming down her face. "I never meant for him to get hurt," she choked out, burying her head in her hands. "I just wanted to teach him a lesson, to show him that he couldn't defy me. But I never imagined it would end like this." The detective studied her for a long moment, his brow furrowed. "So you're admitting to filing a false report that led to the confiscation of the victim's guide dog?" Karen nodded miserably. "Yes, I'm guilty. I'm responsible for his death." The detective let out a long sigh, shaking his head. "Mrs. Walters, what you did was not only cruel and inhumane, but it's also a serious crime. Your actions directly led to the death of an innocent man." Karen flinched at his words, the weight of her guilt crushing her. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll accept whatever punishment I deserve." The detective regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Well, the good news is that you've come forward and admitted your involvement. That will likely work in your favor when it comes to sentencing." Karen looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Does that mean I won't go to jail?" The detective shook his head somberly. I'm afraid that's not the case, Mrs. Walters. What you did was a very serious offense, and you'll likely face significant jail time. But the fact that you've taken responsibility for your actions may help mitigate the sentence. Karen's heart sank, and she felt as if the air had been knocked out of her. She had expected punishment, but the thought of being behind bars filled her with dread. How would she cope with the loss of her freedom, her luxurious lifestyle, her status? As the detective left the room to prepare the formal charges, Karen sat alone, her mind racing with a mixture of fear, guilt, and despair. She had finally faced the consequences of her entitled behavior, and the price was far higher than she ever could have imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Karen found herself facing the harsh realities of her new life behind bars. Gone were the luxuries and privileges she had taken for granted, the lavish home, the designer wardrobe, the deference of those around her. Instead, she was surrounded by the stark confines of a prison cell, forced to mingle with women from all walks of life, each with their own harrowing stories. At first, Karen struggled to adapt to the rigid routine and austere conditions of incarceration. She had never had to do her own laundry, prepare her own meals, or answer to anyone other than her own whims. The loss of control and independence was a crushing blow to her sense of self, and she found herself sinking into despair. But as the days turned into months, something within Karen began to shift. Slowly, she started to see the world beyond her own narrow perspective. She listened to the stories of her fellow inmates, many of whom had endured far greater hardships than she could have imagined. Their resilience and determination in the face of adversity began to chip away at the armor of entitlement that had once shielded Karen from the realities of the world. It was during one of her mandatory counseling sessions that Karen finally confronted the true weight of her actions. The therapist, a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Nora, gently guided her through the process of understanding the depth of her guilt and the profound impact her choices had made on the life of the blind man. You know, Karen, Dr. Nora said softly, the tragedy of what happened is not just the loss of an innocent life. It's also the fact that your own actions were driven by such a deep sense of entitlement and disregard for others. You saw that man as an inconvenience, rather than a human being deserving of compassion and respect. Karen swallowed hard, her eyes downcast. I know, she whispered, her voice thick with shame. I was so consumed by my own desires and my own sense of importance that I couldn't see beyond that. I never intended for anyone to get hurt, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm responsible for his death. Dr. Nora nodded solemnly. That's true. And the path to redemption isn't an easy one. It will require a profound shift in your perspective, a willingness to confront your own flaws and shortcomings, and a genuine desire to make amends. Karen felt a glimmer of hope in the midst of her despair. Do you really think I can do that? After everything I've done? The therapist smiled gently. It won't be easy, but I believe that if you're willing to put in the work, you can find a way to atone for your actions and become a better person. It won't erase the past, but it can help you move forward in a meaningful way. As Karen left the counseling session, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She may have hit rock bottom, but perhaps there was a path forward, one that would allow her to not only make amends, but to truly transform herself in the process. In the months that followed, Karen immersed herself in a rigorous program of self-reflection and personal growth. Under the guidance of Dr. Nora and the support of her fellow inmates, she began to confront the deeply ingrained patterns of entitlement and selfishness that had shaped her worldview. Through group therapy sessions, Karen listened to the stories of women who had faced adversity and trauma far greater than her own. She heard tales of domestic abuse, addiction, and poverty, experiences that had stripped them of their dignity and autonomy, just as her own sense of privilege had done to her. As she opened her heart and mind to these stories, Karen's perspective began to shift. She realized that her past behavior had been a symptom of a much deeper problem, a fundamental lack of empathy and understanding for those less fortunate than herself. Slowly, Karen began to chip away at the walls she had built around her own heart. She started volunteering in the prison's education program, helping her fellow inmates prepare for their GED exams and learn valuable job skills. The sense of purpose and community that she found in these activities began to fill the void left by the loss of her former life. But the true turning point came when Karen decided to write a letter to the family of the blind man she had wronged. With trembling hands, she poured out her deepest regrets and her unwavering determination to make amends. She knew that no words could ever undo the harm she had caused, but she hoped that her sincerity and her commitment to change might offer some measure of comfort. To her surprise, the family responded with a letter of their own. In it, they expressed their grief and their anger, but also a glimmer of hope that perhaps Karen's journey of self-reflection could inspire others to be more compassionate and understanding. Tears streaming down her face, Karen read and reread the letter, her heart swelling with a newfound sense of purpose. She knew that the road to redemption would be long and arduous, but she was more determined than ever to walk it, one step at a time. As the months turned into years, Karen's transformation continued. She became a mentor to the younger women in the prison, sharing her story and encouraging them to break the cycles of entitlement and selfishness that had once defined her own life. And when the day of her release finally came, she stepped out into the world with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to use her second chance to make a positive impact on the lives of others. As Karen emerged from the prison gates, a free woman for the first time in years, she took a deep breath and surveyed the world around her. The once familiar streets and buildings seemed foreign, a stark reminder of how much her life had changed. Gone was the entitled, self-absorbed woman who had once strutted through the world with a sense of unearned superiority. In her place stood a humbled, introspective individual, her eyes now open to the struggles and perspectives of those less privileged than herself. During her time behind bars, Karen had undergone a profound transformation. She had confronted the devastating consequences of her actions, not just for the blind man she had wronged, but for herself as well. The weight of her guilt had been a heavy burden to bear, but it had also sparked a desire for redemption, a need to make amends and become a better person. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Karen set out to rebuild her life, one step at a time. She started by reaching out to the family of the blind man, offering her heartfelt apologies and a sincere desire to honor his memory through acts of service and compassion. To her surprise, the family responded with an unexpected offer. They asked Karen to become involved with a newly established foundation in the blind man's name, dedicated to providing guide dogs and mobility assistance to those in need. Humbled and grateful, Karen readily agreed, determined to pour her energy and resources into this meaningful endeavor. As she immersed herself in the foundation's work, Karen found a sense of fulfillment and purpose that she had never experienced before. Witnessing the transformative impact that a guide dog could have on the life of a person with a disability sparked a fire within her, and she became a tireless advocate for the cause. But Karen's journey of redemption didn't stop there. She also sought out opportunities to mentor young women who, like her, had been shaped by a sense of entitlement and privilege. She shared her story, her mistakes, and the hard-won lessons she had learned, hoping to inspire them to break the cycles of selfishness and embrace a more empathetic, community-oriented mindset. Through it all, Karen remained humble and introspective, never forgetting the gravity of her past actions and the life she had taken. She knew that true redemption could never be achieved, but she was determined to honor the blind man's memory by using her second chance to make a positive impact on the world. As the years passed, Karen's transformation became a testament to the power of personal growth and the possibility of change. She had faced the consequences of her entitled behavior and emerged from the experience a wiser, more compassionate individual, committed to using her newfound perspective to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy she could have hoped to leave. Not the material trappings of her former life, but the lasting impact of her redemption and the lessons she had learned along the way.